This album is David Lee Roth. The album is Eat 'em and Smile, comes out in 1986. So he does 1984, which was with Van Halen, the first album we talked about. And after that, he goes on to do this album. It debuts at number 4, sells over 2 million copies, 4 singles: Yankee Rose, Going Crazy, That's Life, and I'm Easy. Uh, I was more familiar with the Van Halen music than I was with the solo stuff. Listening to this album, I was surprised. This is an incredible album. I love this album. There's a lot I want to talk about the musicianship on this album. And I wanted to say that this is the best on this album. This is the best that his voice has ever sounded to me. I don't know if
Oh yeah,
that's
he sounds
a thing or
amazing on it.
not, but what can you tell us about this album as a big fan of it?
Oh, for me it was so David Lee Roth left, and it's the Steve Vai always claims he wasn't competing with Eddie. He had no reason or interest in doing that. But this record came out, and it was seriously chopping heads. It was like they kicked David Lee Roth out. He's like, okay, check this out, and it's like it was everybody in his band. So it was Greg Bissonette and Billy Sheehan and Steve Vai are all like the best guys in the world. But it's not only they're the best, they're like on fire. Like they have this fire and this attitude. Um, and still I listened to it knowing I was doing this. I put it on last night and just skipped through it and was just like, oh my God, right? Like it's still just cutting heads. They came out and just cut everybody's heads off, said, you think I can't? To me, it was sort of like Roth giving the rock world a big finger. Well, I can be better than Van Halen, right? Like, because it is remarkable. It's one of my favorite guitar records of all time. And for me, it's funny that That's Life and I'm Easy are like the big singles off it. I didn't know that because those are like the goofy songs, like Van Halen puts goofy songs on records, and those are the two goofy ones. And the big ones for me on that record are Shy Boy and Elephant Gun, or
Well,
the two.
okay, I have to say this. I actually put notes on just those 2 songs. I put for Shy Boy and Elephant Gun, the bass and guitar playing together are the craziest thing I've ever heard. Like the
Well,
whole
if you go and
album, the
listen,
bass and guitar insane, but it's the way they're playing against or with each other on those 2 specific songs that you're like, what is happening right now?
now go back and listen to the Salads again, because we're just copying that record everywhere, all the time. Like we do it constantly, and it's all that stuff. And Dave and I do it live all the time, where we would just do all of that stuff from Eat 'em and Smile, where we play all the finger tapping stuff in unison together, and just play crazy runs at the same time together. Um, yeah, it's so fun to listen to, and it's so fun to play. And those songs are just so awesome and kick butt, and the playing is so fun. We were little kids when that came out. I have So the Salads, we started our band in 1986. Is that when this record came out?
The year this came out, yeah.
Yeah, so we started that band in 1986, and we would all go see David Lee Roth play. And then we'd all buy concert shirts. And so I have videos of us playing concerts when we were that age, like Grant Dave and I playing shows, but we're all wearing our David Lee Roth shirts from the concert, like the week before or whatever. Like we all have them on. Let's wear our Roth shirts for the show, right? Like, yeah, that's such an amazing record. It's funny because the only Van Halen records I've ever had hanging on my walls are Van Halen 1 in 1984. But I've always had Eat 'em and Smile in a frame on my wall. And I've always had Huey Lewis and the News in a frame on my wall too. But it's all stealing from that. And all of I don't know, so much lyric stuff we took from that David Lee Roth Eat 'em and Smile record, like all the stylistic stuff that David Lee Roth's doing, we've stolen from there. All the playing. We were little kids, and Canadian Music Week in Toronto used to be back then. It used to be like NAMM show in California, where it was a lot of equipment and gear and instruments and all the people that were endorsed by those instruments. And so we would, as little kids, go to this and get to meet rock stars and and the Sabian booth, which is a drum company, it makes cymbals, had Greg Bissonette there, who's the drummer of David Lee Roth's band, and it was during this record. And so we had to go meet Greg Bissonette and introduce ourselves, and we told him about our band, and and we asked him for some advice because we're writing songs now. Can you give us some good advice on writing music, Greg? And it stuck with us, and it still sticks with me to today, and it is in tune with everything we've been talking about. Is he said, well, good musicians write music. And he said, great bands borrow music. All right. And so we went, oh. And so we just started like, okay, let's just borrow from this and borrow from that and borrow from Fishbone and borrow from Helmet and borrow from Roth. And it worked for us, right? And all of a sudden you have all these songs. So you're like, oh, you take all that, you're not trying to, the wheels already been rolled down the road. Just take the pieces that you like from that and make your own, go in your own direction or whatever, but it's already all been rolled out. So he was right. But anyhow, yeah, it was super influential.
Yeah, listening to the album for the first time over the last few days, three things stood out. So number one was the
It's
music.
funny. I feel offended that you only just listened to that. Like it's because it's
So
same with the Helmet. It's like they're so ingrained as part of me since I was a little boy. But I'm like, what are you talking about? How have you lived without those records?
so in my response to that is, part of me is like embarrassed that maybe I don't know these albums, but then part of me is honored that at 38 years old I'm hearing some all-time great albums for the first time. Like that's one of
It's
my
very
favorite
cool.
one of the favorite things about doing this series of my five favorite albums is I'm actually discovering, like there's Aussie albums that I had never heard, like Blizzard of Oz. It's like I know Crazy Train, but I don't know the whole album. And there's a song Goodbye to Romance I had never heard that's my favorite song in that album. And yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Stop it. Look, we're
I was
I'm a
playing that
little
on
younger
guitar
than
when I
you.
was like 12
You
years
know,
old. I was playing Goodbye to Romance in my bedroom. Yeah.
right. So listening to the album, what stood out was one, the musicianship is world class. Like I don't know if I've heard an album with as good of musicianship, specific, the drums themselves, the bass itself, the guitar itself. I don't know if I've ever heard musicians that good together.
Where it's a nonstop
It's an
party, and it's super
onslaught.
fun to listen to too, because it's not like it's like a jazz record or a fusion record. It's just like this insane playing that's got a ton of fire, and it swings, and it's makes you happy and gives you energy, and it's amazing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just that it's virtuoso performances on every instrument. It's not just that, but they're all oozing attitude and creativity, and the parts are all memorable. So it's like you can play very well but something generic, but these guys, it's just stuff I've never heard before. And I didn't know that this was kind of the debut of Steve Vai. Like apparently this is what brought him to the worldwide, the attention of the world was this album that
Oh
everyone's
yeah,
like,
definitely
who
for
the hell,
me.
like
Yeah.
how can you go from Eddie Van Halen to anyone else when you've already been with the greatest of all time? And it's like,
Well, you go and you
here's this
go and get
Steve
the
Vai
guy that plays
character.
better than everybody.
Yeah. And then there's Steve Vai, and you're like, Jesus. So when I'm listening, I don't know it's Steve Vai when I first listen. And I'm thinking, like, did he bring over Van Halen to this project? That's how good the guitar was.
It's so remarkable, right? And it's still mind blowing. Where I told you my son is playing music now, and when I put it on last night, he turns to me and he goes, "Is that guitar player even human? Is he a human being, or did he come here from another planet? Like, what is that?" And I said, "I know. He's an old man now. This album is how old? It's decades old
86. So
now.
it's 39 years old because I was
Yeah,
born in
and it's
85. So
still better guitar playing than everybody else in the world, and nobody else can touch it still, right? It's like, how is he this good? And where it's so unique and cut heads so hard that I guess almost 40 years later, it's still doing the exact same thing. It's still just as good. Still nobody's ever played quite like that. All right. Or it's like Eddie, where it's like nobody else can play like that. It's like that.
I actually had a note that after listening to Van Halen 1984 and listening to David Lee Roth, Eat 'em and Smile, I actually had a note saying if either of these albums came out today, it would win the awards for Guitar Player of the Year. Like there, even today, there's
Oh
nothing
yeah, it
that's
would
this
still
good.
crush everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if those two albums were head to head, what would have happened, right? If Sammy had sang on 1984, right?
Yeah, it's so wild. I guess the last couple things about this album, I actually saw Steve Vai here at the Bronson Center. So you played. I saw you with iMother at the Bronson Center. So you know it's maybe 1,000 people. It's pretty intimate for Steve Vai. And man, this guy's. You said your son heard it, and he's like, "Is that guy even human?" I was gonna say he brought out a 3-neck guitar and
Oh,
played
that one.
it, and your thought was this guy like is from another planet and touched down to Earth. So it's the same thing your son said. It was my experience seeing him live.
Well, that's what he promotes himself to, right? Him and Jose Trani have always been aliens. They're supposed to be, they have alien secrets and they have all these things that they know that other people don't know, right? Like create this. But really, I think Steve Vai just wishes he was Prince, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what I
Um,
see.
it's funny you mentioned Joe Satriani. So I could be wrong, but I believe the lineage is so you have some of the greatest guitarists of all time. So you have Steve Vai, you have Joe Satriani, you have Kirk Hammett from Metallica, and I believe it's Joe Satriani was the guitar teacher. Sorry, Steve Vai was Joe Satriani's guitar teacher, and Joe Satriani was Kirk Hammett's guitar teacher. So you have a
Actually,
lineage, or is
it's
it
actually
reversed?
just it's actually Joe was all their guitar teachers. So Joe
Okay.
taught Steve Vai guitar.
And
There's some
then
great articles. There's some great footage recently of those two guys having conversations about that.
so I had
Because
it
it's so
reversed.
valuable what they teach, what he was teaching Steve Vai, which is know all the notes on your instrument, like understand your theory and stuff like that is what Joe was teaching him. But yeah, Joe taught Kirk Hammett as well. Joe also taught Alex Skolnick, who is the guitar player from Testament, who is also the guitar player in, oh my gosh, what's it? What's that guitar band that does all the Christmas concerts?
Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
He's the guitar player from Trans-Siberian Orchestra as well. And so that's another one of Joe Satriani's guitar students. And there's somebody else too that's a big rock star that Joe taught. So
Yeah.
Joe's obviously this like incredible guitar teacher that like knows how to harness
Yeah.
people's like.
Can you imagine you were the mentor for Steve Vai? Like that's so
I know
insane.
it's
And
nuts, right?
you're actually right of the order where I wasn't sure who mentored who, but you're right because I remember Steve Vai saying that he was like 12 or 14 when he went to Joe Satriani, and he said the best thing that Joe Satriani did was he didn't try to change my style. Like Joe Satriani is so unique, and he didn't try to change that. So he would teach him things, but always told him like keep that weird uniqueness that you have and expand
Just
on that.
expand on your awesomeness. Here's some value, and just take this.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's great. It's so fun to know that that's that one teacher, and it inspired me as a kid because I knew that as a kid that I pulled out it was back in the phone book days. I'm old enough, and that I was looking through the phone book for Rick Emmett from Triumph because I knew he was a Canadian and likely lived in Toronto. So I was calling anybody that had a name that resembled Rick Emmett because I wanted to be like Steve Vai and Joe Satriani and have a rock star teaching me guitar. And then I started looking up Derry from Honeymoon Suite as well because I wanted one of those guys to be my guitar teacher. It never fabricated, but I tried. It inspired me.
You've manifested everything else in your life, so that probably was close to happening anyways.
Well, I've
I've
worked with Derry a lot, and then I've recorded at Metalworks, which belongs to the guys in Triumph. So I don't know.
two final things. So the album was named Album of the Year in 1986 by Kerrang. So just again, everyone acknowledging how amazing this is. And then the title of the album, the Eat 'em and Smile. So that phrase, Eat 'em and Smile, is actually trademarked all the way back to 1928 by a candy company, which makes sense.
Oh,
So
That's really cool. I didn't know that.
So a cool little fact, Eat 'em and Smile by a candy company.